Direct from Foxborough, Massachusetts, the gem of Norfolk County, and taped at the studios of Foxborough Cable Access. It's Foxborough Central, and here's your host, Bob Hickey.
And welcome to another fine episode of Foxborough Central. I am Bob Hickey, your host, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join with me and my guest as we talk about the people, events, and organizations that make Foxborough truly the gem of Norfolk County. And of course, when we talk about us, we're talking about the big us, the greater us, and all the fun things that we can do. We've got trails for hiking, parks for recreating, we've got theater, we have sports. What a wonderful place to live, Foxborough, home of your New England Patriots going on the Super Bowl 53. But sometimes we have to look a little bit outside the norm, and I think this is going to be an episode that's going to be very interesting for you. It's going to be truly interesting for me. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm joined by my guest, David FISICHELA. David, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you know, I come across, and of course we have a mutual acquaintance, Drew Love, who does my scheduling, and when she told me about this, I was like, yes, absolutely, I want to learn more. So we are here today to talk about gliding. Now, my experience with gliding is zero. In fact, the only time I've really seen a glider is one time I was hiking with my friends Bill Caspera and Dave Brown, and we were in the White Mountains in the Presidentials, and we're up above, and I look down, and there are gliders, because I heard this weird huzzing sound, zzing sound, and I look down below us, and there are gliders everywhere, and I'm amazed. So, that said, I would probably never be caught dead in a glider because it just doesn't seem to me to be the safest thing. So I'm really glad you're here because I'm sure you're going to tell me all about safety and fun and all of that good stuff, right?
Definitely.
Well, let's have at it.
Okay.
So.
Let me clear up a few misconceptions about gliders. Gliders don't need wind to fly.
Of course not. How silly of me.
A lot of people think they do. Gliders are nothing but specially designed airplanes that have no engine, and they have what's known as a high aspect wing, which generates a lot of lift with very minimal amount of drag. And what people don't really realize is that gliders are always descending through the air. They're always falling towards the ground. So we get our glider up to a certain altitude, and it's typically going to be coming down at, say, 100 feet per minute. So for every minute that you're flying, you're typically descending about 100 feet. But
that's not a great rate of descent. That seems to be very peaceful.
It is. It's compared to a typical plane like a Cessna 172, for example, it has a much, much higher glide ratio. So we can glide for every unit of altitude that we have. A typical glider can glide for maybe 30, 40, 50, even 60 units in the horizontal. So if you have, say, 5,000, 6,000 feet of altitude, you can glide for up to 60 miles. So
wow.
It can take you quite a distance if you want. So anyway, as the glider is descending, we have to try. We either can just constantly descend and glide down to our landing zone back to the airport, or we can try to remain aloft, and that's the key. That's when we go from gliding to soaring. Soaring is the act of staying aloft greater than your ability to just glide to the ground.
Well, now would probably be the best time to say that my friend David FISICHELA is a glider pilot with the Greater Boston Soaring Club. So we're not just a gliding club, we're a soaring club, so that must mean that we
hope to stay up for a lot longer.
Are a sport, and you're enjoying this. So.
That's right. The club is located at the Sterling Airport in Sterling, Massachusetts. Okay. And it's made up of about 120 members.
Really? Okay.
At all ages from 14 to 90. It's a sport that anybody can participate in.
Don't I have to own a glider?
You do not. The club owns, we own about 8 different gliders, both single-place gliders for one person and two-place gliders for 2 people, which of course you would need if you were learning with an instructor. And we have 3 tow planes to get us aloft.
You know how many seats I would need for my glider? 0, because I'm probably not going to be up in one. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding everybody.
I think, some people, I've heard all the different reasons why people don't want to go up in gliders. Well, there's no engine. Well, to me, that's one less thing to go wrong. Gliders fly quite well.
It's a great way of looking at it. I like that.
Gliders fly quite well without an engine, and they're actually quite stable. In a glider, if you just took your hands and feet off of everything and let the glider fly itself, it would do just fine.
So it's a stable machine. It's not. I don't know why I keep equating this with hang gliders, where it's the flappy tent, but this is. And I guess it just occurred to me, but during World War II, the gliders were used, and so this is that same principle where they're towed behind a plane and then brought aloft, and then they come down.
There are three.
I apologize for not being more well versed in this, but
that's
that's why I enjoy having these conversations. I get to learn. So
there are three principal ways that we get our gliders in the air. The one that most people are familiar with is what's known as aero tow, and another aircraft will tow a glider up to altitude. And we have 3 tow planes that do that. And that's our primary means of getting gliders aloft at our club. A second way of doing it is what's known as a winch launch. If you can imagine a rope, a very long rope, a couple thousand feet long, at the end of a very, very powerful winch that gets hooked up to the glider. When the winch turns at a very rapid speed, it pulls the glider along and aloft.
like a kite.
Like a kite. So the glider will go up at a very steep rate of descent, reach its apex, and then release the rope, and then glide from there.
That's amazing.
So it's like
That sounds like a great Founders Day
it's
activity.
like getting shot a little bit out of a cannon.
Yeah.
So, that's quite a popular way in Europe to do it. It's very inexpensive. You do need a fair amount of space to do that effectively. And we've done it a couple of times at the Glider Club, but we primarily use the aircraft to tow us up. The third way to do it is with what's known as self-launch, and as the name infers, there'd be a small engine on the plane with a propeller, and the glider would get itself aloft.
Okay.
And once it does that, typically the engine is shut down, and the engine is either stowed or the blades of the propeller fold back, and everything is shut off, and you become a glider at that point. And you can get back down from there. Once we're in the air, say we're being towed up behind a tow plane, we will stay behind that tow plane, and we'll be connected with a rope that's about maybe 200 feet long.
Okay.
And it's probably the most challenging part of gliding is doing the aero tow, because it's like tandem flying. It's like formation flying.
I would imagine you'd still have to keep piloting it
because you're not just being
drag,
pulled along. You have to fly.
You can't drag the plane down.
And as the tow plane turns, you have to turn behind it. But once you get up to altitude, there's a release mechanism inside the glider, and you pull that, and it releases the tow hook from the glider.
And then you're free.
And then you're free, and everything becomes nice and quiet and gentle, and you're free to go pretty much where you want.
Except for that huzzing sound, which is really interesting. If you're a civilian, if you're somebody just walking and you hear the huzzing sound, it's like, ooh, that's really interesting.
Especially especially when gliders get to be, start going fast. It's not unusual for a glider to attain speeds of 80, 90, 100 miles an hour.
Really?
They can go quite fast. And so once we're up there now, we're free from the tow plane, and we're starting our descent at, as I said, approximately 100 feet per minute.
Well, wait a second. So, and I apologize, I'm talking with David FISICHELA, and I'm just really fascinated by this. So, do you hear the same huzzing sound inside the craft, or is it a different experience?
It's a different sound.
What's the experience?
What you typically hear.
Take us aloft.
So when you're being towed behind the tow plane, you're being dragged at a speed that the glider typically doesn't really want to fly at.
Because the plane is going at...
The plane has to stay, typically your tow speeds are around 60, 70 miles an hour.
Okay.
And it's, you feel like the kind of the jarring motions of the tow plane as it's turning and pulling slack out of the tow.
Whatever turbulence there is, so sure.
But once you're released, things settle down, and it's just the wind over the wings at that point. And gliders are not totally airtight, so you do hear kind of air seeping in through the seals. And glider pilots use that noise, that sound of the air over the wings and kind of seeping in through the canopy as an indicator of how fast you're going. And so you don't even have to be looking at your airspeed indicator to know if things start to get really, really quiet, that maybe you're going a little bit too slow and you have to lower the nose and go faster. But once we're up there and we're free of the tow plane, our next challenge is to stay up as long as possible. If there's no lift, and we typically will get a tow to maybe 3,000 feet above the ground.
I was going to ask you how, because with the winch launch, it's 1,000 feet or however long the rope is. But a nice place is 3,000?
Typically, we towed about 3,000 feet. And from there, if you did nothing but glide back down, it would take about 20 minutes. You get about a 20-minute ride out of it.
Okay.
But so our challenge at that point is to try to stay aloft. And the way we do that is to try to find columns of rising air.
Thermals.
Thermals, exactly.
All right.
So the sun is, hopefully the sun is shining. It's heating the ground in certain places. And the heating is not uniform. So we'll get maybe one spot of solar activity that's heating that ground, causing that air to heat and rise. And as that air is rising, we want to try to find it. You can't see it, so you look for other clues. Some of the other clues may be a bird, a raptor, who is doing the same thing that you're trying to do, which is stay aloft. So they like to circle in rising air. You can look for clouds, because as that column of air is rising, it is cooling, and as that air is cooling, it's starting to condense a little bit, and under certain conditions, a cloud will form. So a lot of times, we can see certain types of cloud formations will indicate that there's rising air below them. So we look for those kinds of clouds and kind of fly under them. So once you find that rising air, you'll notice it typically through the sensation of, you get kind of a little kick in the pants. It's kind of like going up in an elevator a little bit, that little sense of motion up. And maybe it's just a wingtip that lifts up.
What an interesting feeling that must be.
And you say, oh, there it is. So you'll turn the glider into it, because now the columns of air are not that large necessarily. So for us to continue to fly in them and get lift out of them, we have to bank the glider and fly slow circles in that column of air. And so, as I said, we're always going down at about 100 feet per minute. But if that column of air is rising at, say, 500 feet per minute, our net gain will be about 400 feet per minute. And that's how we can gain altitude. And we can continue to circle in that rising column of air until it peters out, or we get to what's known as the cloud base, because we don't want to fly in the cloud. We can't legally do so, and we can't see anything.
I was going to ask, what is the highest altitude that you could go?
Typically, we can go to technically 18,000 feet, which is where a certain airspace begins. But we don't want to go into the clouds at some point. So we want to stay below the cloud base.
I don't mean to be ignorant, but what is the height of the cloud base?
It can change. It can be variable, highly variable. Some days it's only 1,000 feet.
Okay.
Other days it can go to 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 feet. And so you want to climb until you feel like you're not climbing as well anymore, and then you leave that thermal in search of the next one. And so if you have a destination in mind, it may be many, many miles away, you can hopscotch from thermal to get there.
Do you need mountains for thermals, or do the thermals happen?
Thermals happen anywhere, anywhere that the ground and the solar radiation is conducive to creating them. But there are other types of lifts. I'm glad you mentioned mountains, because there are two other types of lift that we can use. One is known as ridge lift. Now, when you were up in the White Mountains, you saw those gliders below you along near the mountainside, they were using what's known as ridge lift. So if you can envision, a mountain or a large hill, and the wind is blowing, and this is where the wind can help a glider.
Gotcha.
And the wind is blowing towards the mountain. As soon as that horizontal wind hits the slope, it's going to be deflected upward. And it's that upward deflection of the wind which gliders seek to use as rising air.
Okay.
And so you can ride that. Say you think of a mountain range, like the Appalachians or something, that are going for hundreds of miles, that are fairly contiguous. If the wind is consistently blowing from one direction perpendicular to this mountain range, you can ride that rising air along that ridge for hundreds of miles.
Isn't that interesting?
And you can just be soaring along for hours and hours on end.
Have you ever done that?
I have not. I have not had the privilege of doing that. Many of the club have. You can do it in New Hampshire.
Well, I'd love to talk about the club. So right now I want to remind everybody we're talking about about pilot gliding. What do you call it, gliders?
Gliders?
Gliders, okay, so talking about gliders. With David FISICHELA, he is with the Greater Boston Soaring Club. Now they have a website, it's www.soargbsc, Greater Boston Soaring Club. soargbsc.com. And they also have a Facebook page. You can be their friend, and it's Greater Boston Soaring Club. So you can find them very easily, become a follower. And so this is a club, and there are pilots and people who maybe aren't pilots.
There are people.
I know you're a pilot.
We have social members. We have instructors.
Okay.
We have tow pilots who are members. And I think that's also a good opportunity to talk about what the club does. The club is really there to advocate and be a resource for those who want to go gliding. And as such, we do a lot of instruction. We have a group of really high quality glider instructors. The instruction is provided free to members. You just pay for the cost of the tow in your membership, but the cost of the instruction is free.
Which is, by the way, really interesting. So you mentioned cost, and I don't have to have my own glider. I can become a part of this club and become a member, and that gives me some privileges.
Gives you access to all the club's gliders.
There's an annual fee and then a monthly charge, but with that comes use of the equipment.
Correct.
How interesting.
So as soon as you can start off with having zero aviation experience, have never been in a glider before.
That's me, yes.
And our instructors will take you to the point where, over time, you can learn to solo, be by yourself in a glider, and then have access to the club's gliders to go up and soar.
How cool.
And beyond that, once you get more hours in flying solo, you would go and take your written and your flight test to get your glider pilot certificate from the FAA, which is, it's technically not a license, but we call it a glider pilot certificate.
Sure.
And that would allow you to take passengers up as well.
Wow, interesting. So, David, with this club, how many members are there?
It's about 120 members. It fluctuates. And as I said, our age range in the club is from like 14 to 90. We have a tremendous juniors program, so we really encourage young adults to participate. So any boy or girl 14 years old or older can join for like $60 a year, and they can even work off the cost of their tows by helping out on the weekends during the flight, on the flight line.
And most of the time is spent on the weekends. This is
It's primarily a weekend activity for instruction and for if you want to come and just participate. If say you've never been in a glider before and you want to try it out, if you come by on the weekends, you can buy a glider ride for, I think it's about $100, $120 to go up with an instructor.
So I don't have to make a full commitment. I can go in there and I can kick the tires, if you will.
Exactly. You can go up with a qualified instructor and see what it's like, check it out.
But it's one of those things, I'm sure, that if I got into it,
it can be pretty addicting. Yes,
it
can be pretty addicting. If you kind of like it and you're still not sure, we have what's known as I think it's a 90-day trial membership, which allows you to kind of not make the full commitment, but come back and get a few lessons and see what you think. Most people tend to stick it out. It's pretty exciting.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
So again, we're at www.soargbsc.com, and we're close to running out of time already. I know it flies, but I've got questions. So safety issues, is it something where it's really hard for me to learn how to do this? Do I have to be, and I know that I know how to drive a car. A car can be extremely unsafe if you're not a good driver, you're not paying attention. So I get that, but from a safety perspective, if say, my children want to do this, is this the ideal Christmas gift?
It's, safety, it's a hard thing to quantify to people. But let me say this, and I think this is a good way to put safety in perspective, I think. The FAA says that a 14-year-old who is qualified can legally solo a glider.
Okay.
So that means a 14-year-old boy or girl can be flying a glider by themselves after they've had sufficient instruction.
Well, that makes sense, because that means that it's safer in the air than on the Massachusetts streets.
Exactly.
So I
they can't drive a car.
I can see that.
And they can get their license. They can get their FAA certificate at age 16 before they can drive a car.
Okay.
And we have kids in the program who are soloing at those ages and getting their certificates.
That's great.
We're very safety conscious. We run by a set of rules, and that's it's one of the things that I think we try to instill in both our junior members and our adult members is a safety mindset. But it's a great way for kids, especially that age, to learn responsibility.
I was just going to say the responsibility goes hand in hand with the safety.
And it really, I think, is. It's great for their self-esteem. I mean, they really have accomplished a lot. It takes a lot of work, but anybody can do it. I mean, I didn't start flying until I was 50 years old. So you can start anytime. It's a great retirement hobby to pick up. again, and it can be
It
a
must be an
lifetime.
amazing sensation to be soaring by yourself in a glider.
I
can't imagine.
It's as close to being like a bird as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing like being in a small Cessna. Glider cockpits are relatively small. You kind of wear a glider. The other thing people ask me, they say, "Oh, I'm kind of afraid of heights." Well, I tell them I am too. I'm terrified of heights, but I do not mind the sensation of being in a glider for some reason. And I hear that from a lot of people.
Wow. I'm speaking with David FISICHELA. He is a glider pilot and a wonderful spokesperson. Now, do you have a position with the club, or are you just a very enthusiastic
I'm just a very
who is
enthusiastic
spreading
member.
the word?
Yep. As a club, we all take turns with the various tasks that are required for running a glider operation. So sometimes you're the safety officer at the field, other times you're recording flight times, things like that. But we have a board of directors that runs the management of the club, and it's a great group of people. It's a very fun and social activity as well.
Well, you're certainly a great ambassador for the sport, so I'm very, very pleased to have met you. I'm going to give you the last word. I'm going to remind everybody again that I'm speaking with David FISICHELA. He's a glider pilot and is with the Greater Boston Soaring Club, soaring because they try to soar, and as we've learned today, and that was really interesting. www.soargbsc.com is how you can follow them, and you have regular meetings. Is this was it more activity
more
oriented?
business meeting. We're more activity oriented.
Okay.
So pretty much any weekend day between April and the end of November, if the weather's good, you can find activity at the Sterling Airport.
And the way to do that would be to jump onto your website, www.soargbsc.com, or be a follower on Facebook, be a friend, and then you would find it. I gather it's just, hey, this looks like a great weekend. Come on up. We're all going to get together.
Come on out and just watch the activity, talk to the people. There'll be plenty of pilots there that will show you the gliders, let you sit in one. If you're still kind of on the fence about it, watch them take off and land. It's just an exhilarating sport, and it can be as challenging or as kind of docile as you want to make it. We have it can be a competitive sport as well. We have members who are very competitive. A couple of them are on the national soaring team, the U.S. national soaring team. They go all over the world and compete. We have members who they do a lot of cross-country soaring, which means they'll take off from Sterling and they'll go up to New Hampshire and beyond and come back. So they'll be gone 6 hours, maybe even longer. Spend the entire day flying that glider and come back. So they're that adept at finding lift and understanding the weather and using that to their advantage. Others just stick around the airport, within gliding distance of the airport, and they might go up for an hour or two and just always come back to, know that you can always get back to the airport safely.
Well, that's the important thing.
And have as much fun doing that.
Wow, sounds like it's an ideal sport for somebody who's interested, and that your organization is the great place for resources, people with experience, and people who are welcoming.
Definitely.
How nice, how nice. So, David FISICHELA would love to have you or a family member come up and visit them with the Greater Boston Soaring Club in Sterling, Massachusetts. You can follow them at www.soargbsc.com or be their friend on Facebook. Just look up Greater Boston Soaring Club and you can find them. You get the last word, and I want to thank you so much for coming in today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having us. And I do want to just encourage people to come out, find a nice weekend day, just to come out to Sterling Airport. And we get going probably operations start usually around 10 o'clock in the morning and go until kind of the lift ends at the end of the day. But you'll see the most activity around the middle of the day. Come on out and just check it out.
So it sounds like your season is baseball season. So if you're thinking baseball, you can also think soaring.
Definitely.
Fantastic. David, it's been a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here on Foxborough Central. And thank you for taking the time to join us. I'd also like to thank my wonderful volunteers, Adam Taj and Alex Malin, who do so much to put this on the air. Alex behind the camera. Alex is our editor. Adam is behind the camera. Also, Paul Beck, who is the best director anybody could ever have. He's here, as always, behind the glass. On behalf of all of us here at Foxborough Cable Access, have a wonderful day, Foxborough.